Welcome back, everybody. Second half of James. I'm excited. I loved skimming, right? It's really hard not to throw on the brakes for a couple different parts and really dig in. But I have to remind myself that the purpose of this week's portion was to skim, and we'll come back and dig a little bit deeper. But man, what a great end to this journey that we've been going on in James. And there's some ouchies in there, but it's so good to take a look at the big picture, back up, look at where he's going and what we're talking about, the big picture, before you go in and you can't take things out of context, right? And we have to remember who he's talking to. He's talking to the Messianic believer. But man, this is all good encouragement and all about tilling, pruning, and weeding your garden, the garden of your heart, which we'll get into in just a second. So let's jump right in. We start off in chapter 3. I'm just going to talk about a couple of themes that I picked up on that, we might get into later, but some things that really stuck out to me. Bear with me. I'm sorry if I get excited and go a little bit long. There's a lot of stuff to cover, but there's some things that are just really burning in my heart from what we read from Jesus' brother today. So we start off in chapter 3, and he starts off with the good old watch your mouth talk, right? When we are created in the image of God, and when God speaks, he creates. And I think we greatly underestimate the power of our words as believers and as just humans in general. I think the adage, sticks and stones will break my bones and words will never hurt me, is an absolute lie from the devil. Because our most powerful weapon is our mouth against the devil, and it can be used in a negative way against other people and other believers. So we need to watch our mouth, right? I love the metaphors as the rudder of the ship. It's seemingly such a small part, but it is so important. He talks about wildfires, right? I mean, the language he uses is so jarring in a way, right? But we'll get to that, I'm sure, next week. I won't dwell too much on that, but watch your mouth, right? It's a look in the mirror thing again with James. He's saying, look, watch it. But what I really want to sit on today, for the most part, is centering around chapter 3, verses 17 and 18, which I want to read real quickly to you. And this is right after he's talked about watch out for the wisdom of the world. We fight against each other because of jealousy and things like that. But he talks about the wisdom that comes from above. Chapter 3, verses 17, this is the Passion Translation. But the wisdom from above is always pure, filled with peace, considerate and teachable. It is filled with love and never displays prejudice or hypocrisy. He talked about that earlier in earlier chapters, right? Remember that about prejudice? In any form, and it always bears the beautiful harvest of righteousness. Good seeds, and this is where I really want to sit, good seeds of wisdom's fruit will be planted with peaceful acts by those who cherish making peace. Who are those that should be cherishing making peace? That's you and me, right? I find this such an interesting contrast to the parable of the sower. In this instance, the good seeds of wisdom fruit will be planted with peaceful acts. This whole first half of the book, James is hammering in, faith is proved by works, right? The proof of our faith comes out in our fruit. And these fruit, like we talked about many times over the past few weeks, we are meant to reproduce ourselves, be fruitful, and multiply. That's physically in flesh, having children, but having spiritual children, planting seeds and producing trees of righteousness that will produce more fruit and multiply, right? The whole purpose of the Christian life is to love one another, love God, and make more disciples. Go and make disciples, Jesus said, right? And I find it so interesting in contrast, like I said, to the parable of the sower. The parable of the sower, if you don't know the story, it's in Matthew, Google it. But the sower represents Jesus. The seed represents his grace. He's always sowing seed with his word, whether this word or words from his mouth, right? He's always calling, he's always knocking. But what the seed produces is completely dependent on the condition of the soil. And the soil is the condition of the heart in that parable. So the sower, Jesus, is sowing his seed, the word, but his word is never the problem if there's not growth. The soil determines the condition and the fruitfulness of that seed, right? And I love this, and I love James because I think the whole book seems to be about what is the condition of your soil. It has to be tilled, it has to be watered, and even when things are growing, it needs to be constantly weeded. Those of us, which is not me, but I'm very familiar with the idea of a garden, right? That you can till, you can water, you can plant, but if you do not weed, you will not grow anything but weeds. The weeds will take over your garden because good condition, soil is good conditions for anything. So, and he talks about in chapter 5, we'll get to in a minute, about harvest, right? But we constantly have to look in the mirror, and James is such a great book for that, of what am I saying? What am I doing? What am I thinking? What am I running after? I need to prune, I need to weed, I need to till, I need to fertilize, right? This section about the wisdom of above and him talking about the seeds just really sat on me of the big picture of the sanctification part, right, of the New Testament Christian's life, that we constantly need to be trying to improve, and sometimes it feels like you're pulling the same weeds over and over again, but it is definitely worth it, and it will come to fruition, right? Okay, we'll move on. I'll stop preaching on that. Chapter 4, the desires of this world are not of the Lord, right? He talks about that very quickly, but I love in chapter 4, he quotes an Old Testament scripture. Does the scripture mean nothing when to you that says, the Spirit that God breathed into our hearts is a jealous lover who intensely desires to have more and more of us? I never really put it together that quotation is right before when he says, surrender to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. So it's not just surrender to a higher power. He's saying surrender to God's love, the one who loves you, and he will come in. If you resist the unfaithful person, the one who is constantly calling for you, who has negative things, the enemy, right? Resist that enemy, surrender to God, and he will come and take care of your business, right? The enemy will flee, and he will clean your house. His refining fire will take care of stuff, and he will help you till that garden, right? He's showing us in his word how much he loves us, and our ultimate destiny is written in these pages, and he has written them on our hearts. He's a jealous lover, and he wants to take care of business for us. Sanctification is a continual process of surrender, all right? It's a hard thing to do, is to lift up the hands and say, I have to let go of pride. I've learned my whole life that, it's all about hard work, which it is, and weeding is work, but in many ways, Christian life is a series of, take this from me, Lord, right? Surrender to the jealous lover. So resist things of the world. He talks about the desires of this world are bad and not of him. Resist the things of this world and surrender to our jealous lover, right? Okay. Chapter 5. Now I'm going to kind of call back to some of the seed stuff and more plant metaphors. I'm very planty right now, right, through these past few weeks, but it is, the Lord made creation for a purpose, and I think so much of what is in his character all of his character is found in nature and in his word. But anyway, so chapter 5, there's a lot of things. I'm going to skip past the warning to the rich portion. We'll get to that in one of the latter weeks. But I want to read very quickly. He talks about endurance and talking about the harvest and how the harvest is a slow process. That you seed, you till, you seed, you wait for the former and the latter rain. We have experienced, we almost had some tornado watches recently here in town. That's the latter rain, right? You get rainstorms in the spring when you plant, and you get rainstorms in the fall, and then you harvest, right? Former and latter rain. Anyway, but he talks about how this harvesting process, we know when you plant a seed, you don't harvest it the next day. It wouldn't be good. But there's a marathon mentality that we as Christians have to cling to. Us millennials, Gen Zers, whatever the heck you want to call whatever we're going through right now mentally, the mental block we have as modern believers is instant gratification, right? I can Google something immediately and get what I need. I want to microwave it, right? I want to have it now. We've been talking about that in our youth program recently. But we run a marathon. And what he talks about with the harvest and having endurance reminds me of Hebrews 12. I'm going to read this in the New King James. Let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us. That calls back to chapter 3, right? Resist the devil, weed, prune. We need to throw off weight and the sin that ensnares us, right? You can't run well without having the light clothes. You look at what track people wear. It's the lightest, skimpiest thing that they can put on that's modest, and correct shoes, right? Anyway, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. So we're running towards our jealous lover, right, and surrendering everything. For who the joy that was set before him endured, so he also endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. But the main point is we're running a race, and it is a marathon, not a sprint, right? And it reminds me, I have run one race, a long-distance race that had to do with competition. It was in late elementary school. My dad took me out, and he would have me run a mile every day for a certain amount of time. We did a fun run, right? And he kept preaching to me, it's all about pace. Whenever, they pop that little pop gun and everybody takes off sprinting, you need to have a pace in your mind, run that pace. Don't look at what everybody else is doing. That's like Jacob, right? Not Jacob. After Moses, whoever that was. My brain can't do it right now, but don't look to the right or to the left. That's going to drive me nuts. But don't look to the right or to the left, right? Look straight ahead. And run your race at your own pace. And, it happened exactly as he said. I was last when we started, right? Me and one other girl were last. Everybody took off running. It was only a mile, but we were little, right? And I didn't really notice how many people I was passing. I just set my pace and kept going. I turned the last turn, and it was a long straight to the finish line. And there was one girl ahead of me, and my friends were losing their mind. I had older friends from the neighborhood that were losing their mind that I was, winning this race. And I didn't realize where I was. And when I finished, they handed me a gold medal. I thought I was going to get second, but there was a girls and a boys division. So we won't talk about Amanda. She went on to be a college long-distance runner, so that was definitely her thing. I won the gold medal because I listened to my father. I didn't pay attention to what anybody else was doing. I didn't run with jealousy. I ran my own race with endurance. I had people to help me along the way, right? And I won. I never ran another competition race again. I just quit while I was ahead, right? But the principle still stands. We run a long distance race, and we're not here to gas ourselves out. Rest is important. Endurance is important. And not looking at what others is doing is important. But the last point that I want to end on from James chapter 5 is we need to help one another. And a lot of long distance racing is a team sport. You can't run by yourself the whole time. There's pace setters and there's drafting, kind of like in cycling, right? But we run a race, and we are lucky enough to not run this alone. The Christian life is not meant to be alone, and James talks about praying for the sick, and if somebody falls astray, to go help them, right? We run a race. Let's constantly prune our hearts. Let's not look at what everybody else is doing. Let's run our own race and look after one another. We don't want to look at what everybody else is doing in our race with jealousy, but we want to, look for something we can look forward to. We can look at those ahead in hope, not in jealousy. We can look at those behind with encouragement, right? But I love what James, just the beautiful picture James has painted over